Stribling News, September the 8th, 1938. Mrs. F. A. Ure, Virginia Ure, and Irvin Hopkins spent Tuesday in Nashville. Mr. and Mrs. J. D. Gray and children Velma, Betty, Hilda, and George, and Miss Irene Robbs of Stewart spent Sunday with Mr. and Mrs. George Gray. Jonas D. Gray was born 3 August 1896 in Stribling, Stewart County, Tennessee. He passed away 10 April 1974 en route to the Trinity Hospital in Erin, Houston County, Tennessee. His parents were George Gilbert Gray, born 1853 in Dixon County, Tennessee, and passed away 1922 in Stribling, Stewart County, Tennessee. His mother was Ida W. Brandon, born 1858, and passed away 1932 in Stribling, Stewart County, Tennessee. He married Grace M. Shadwick, born 1893, passed away 1982, and married Grace on 24 December 1917 in Stewart County, Tennessee. This is a photo of Jonas when he was probably in his early 20s, and probably this would have been in Stribling, Stewart County, Tennessee. This is a photo of Jonas when he was working at a barrel hoop making shop in Stribling, and the men listed here, the ones I know, I'll give their names. The first man was unknown. The second one from the left would be J.D. Gray or Jonas Gray. The third man is unknown. The fourth man is my great uncle Jack Lane, and the fifth man it'd be my great uncle Jim Lane. Then the unknown, and then Tom Booker. And Tom Booker is holding a sapling that they would make the barrel hoops out of. They would split them on the machine with knives, drawing knives, or different types of tools, and they'd strip them about a ½ inch thick, straighten them out good as they could, stack them. You can see them stacked there behind them. And then they would sell them to the men that came around from St. Louis and in different areas to take them to, usually a lot of them was used in the beer making barrels. And then they would send them off, and don't know exactly, of course, it'd be the time of the century according to how much they would get for them. But there was a big, pretty good money making thing for the individuals back then. They didn't make a lot of money, but it gave them something to do and gave them some money. Jonas announced for county judge. At this time he had moved to Stewart in Houston County, Tennessee. It says Gray announces for county judge. J.D. Gray of Stewart, Tennessee has announced his candidacy for election to the office of Houston County Judge. His candidacy is subject to the general election of August 3rd, 1950. Mr. Gray has served as magistrate for a number of years, during which time he has become generally regarded as one of the outstanding magistrates of the court. Mr. Gray was first elected to the county court in 1930, having served altogether 14 years. 6 of this time he was chairman. Mr. Gray states that it is his intention to make a thorough canvass of the county and see personally as many voters as time will permit. Velma Gray, the daughter of Jonas, mentioned in an article, was born in 1919 in Stribling and passed away 2010. in Glasgow, Kentucky. She was married to Henry Howard Moore, and his parents were Macon Lewis Moore, born 1885, passed away 1969, and Mary Elizabeth Lizzie Lane. She was born 1890 and passed away 1956. The Hilda mentioned in the article is Hilda Leatrice Gray, born 24 March 1925, passed away 11 March 1975 in Illinois. She married Harry Roberts Cottrell Jr., and he was born 28 July 1923, passed away 5 November 1995. This is Hilda and Harry's marriage record. It's the marriage record on the left bottom. Staff Sergeant Harry R. Cottrell Jr. Married to Hilda L. Gray. Staff Sergeant Harry R. Cottrell Jr. To Hilda L. Gray, 15 July 1943. This is a photo of Harry Robert Cottrell Jr. And sorry I couldn't find any of Hilda. Betty Gray, mentioned in the article, was born 1924 and passed away 13 November 2008 in Dover. She married Leland Elwood Macaulay in 1947. He was born 1923 and passed away 2003. They were married. This is an obituary for George G. or Gilbert Gray, mentioned in the article. George G. Gray, 1929 to 2021. Waynesboro, Tennessee. On June the 1st, 2021, George G. Gray passed from this life to the next. Born December the 24th, 1929 in Stuart, Tennessee, Mr. Gray was a 55-year resident of Waynesboro, Tennessee. The practice of law, presiding over a courtroom, and raising his 5 children were his primary occupations. His favorite pastime included hunting, fishing, walking the trails around his home, and later traveling with his family. All of this was accomplished with the love of his wife of nearly 64 years, Julia Graves Gray. In 1947, Mr. Gray graduated from Erin High School and later enlisted with the U.S. Marines for the next 4 years. Thereafter, he worked for the Tennessee Highway Patrol, received his undergraduate degree from Austin Peay University, and graduated from Vanderbilt University School of Law in 1959. Before moving to Waynesboro in 1966, Mr. Gray worked as claims adjuster for Travelers Insurance and as an associate attorney for the law firm of John Grissom and Charles Costner, and as a staff attorney for the Tennessee Department of Revenue, including an appointment to the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. Mr. Gray moved to Waynesboro to join Ray Haggard Jr. in his law office in 1966, until Mr. Haggard's death in 1968. At this crossroads, Mr. Gray opened his own law practice, where he remained until his retirement on January 31st, 2020, at the age of 90. Our community benefited in various ways from Mr. Gray's 54-year law practice and brilliant legal mind. For 50 of those years, he was the attorney for the Tennessee Valley Electric Cooperative, TVEC, Wayne County Bank, and the city of Waynesboro, and for close to 10 years he was appointed, then elected, General Sessions Judge. In addition, Mr. Gray was a founding member of the Rotary Club and remained an active member for 30 years. Over the course of those 30 years, he functioned in several officer capacities, including president, and became a Paul Harris Fellow. He was also a Shriner, a 32nd degree Mason, and attorney for the city of Clifton for several years. Finally, Mr. Gray served on a variety of committees for the Tennessee Bar Association throughout his professional life. Preceded in death by his parents, Jonas D. and Grace Shadwick Gray, his daughter Rebecca Lynn Gray, and his sisters Velma Moore, Betty McCauley, and Hilda Cottrell. Mr. Gray is survived by his wife Julia Graves Gray, his children Stephen Shadwick Gray and his wife Sally, David Brandon Gray and his fiancée Beth, George Glenn Gray and his wife Samantha, and Susan Lee Gray Wagner and her husband Brian, as well as 8 grandchildren: Brandy, Sarah, Ashley, Matt, Brandon, Sam, Elizabeth, and Julia. 9 great-grandchildren: Isabel, Hendricks, Gabriel, Preston, Camden, Peyton, Reese, Jackson, Abel, and 3 nieces and 1 nephew: Jennifer, Jane, Linda, and Wayne. Mr. Gray is survived by too many granddogs and grandcats to name, but Phoebe was his favorite and he hers. Continue reading from the Stribling News, September the 8th, 1938. Mr. and Mrs. Claude Pegram and family of Nashville spent the weekend with Mr. and Mrs. F.A. Ure. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Hemmus of Indian Mound spent the weekend with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. John Hemmus. Mrs. Johnny Bartles and daughter Patsy of Detroit, Michigan, are spending this week with relatives in Stribling. Miss Dorothy Pegram returned to her home in Nashville Monday after a 2-week stay with relatives in Stribling. Mr. and Mrs. Gary Hogan of Nashville spent last weekend with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Sykes. The condition of Mrs. Albert Boswell remains unchanged. Verbert Gray spent Wednesday night with Mrs. William Shears of Dover. Mr. Charles Hemmus of Indian Mound visited Mr. and Mrs. George Gray Sunday. This concludes the reading of the Stribling News, September the 8th, 1938. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.